Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Rebecca Zerman. I am the Community Engagement Director at Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, and we advocate for policies on the state and federal level to improve the lives of kids and families all around the state. And today we'll be talking about redistricting in Arkansas. Rich Huddleston, our Executive Director, will be talking about why Arkansas Advocates supports a ballot measure that would create a Citizens Redistricting Commission. Bonnie Miller, who's with Arkansas Voters First, who's leading the way for that ballot measure, will explain what the Citizens Redistricting Commission would do and how it would work, and give some updates about the Supreme Court case that's being heard on that issue right now. And then Scott Hamilton, Executive Director with Urban League of the state of Arkansas, will talk about the impact that gerrymandering has had in our state and around the country. But I want to start by saying that we are recording this call. If you have questions, you can type it in the chat box, and we'll also take questions at the end. And you can just mute or unmute yourself if you want to say your questions. But I think that's all I've got. If Rich, you want to start?
Sure. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Rich Huddleston. I'm the Executive Director of Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families. And I know some of you are probably wondering, why is Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families so supportive of this amendment? Well, it's very much consistent with our mission and the work that we do. Every 10 years following the census, voter districts are redrawn. This November, we hope an amendment will be on the ballot, the Arkansas Voters First Amendment, that will allow Arkansas voters to decide if our state should create an independent Citizens Redistricting Commission to determine how our voting districts will look like over the next decade. Why is this important? Well, historically, redistricting has been done in backroom deals worked out between politicians and in many cases, highly paid lobbyists. And across the country, redistricting has been used by both sides of the aisle as a political tool instead of as a critical, objective, and fair method to ensure that all voters' voices are heard and matter. My organization, Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, is especially troubled by the role redistricting has played in silencing voters of color and robbing them of their right to representation. Why? Not only has this been bad for the democratic process, but it's bad for public policy for children and families in Arkansas, especially children and families of color and the most vulnerable among us. By robbing voters of color of their voice and their right to representation, they have been robbed of their influence in the policymaking process too. This in turn means we have far too often seen bad public policy passed that hurts vulnerable children and families, and far too often seen the defeat of good public policy that would have helped improve the well-being of Arkansas's children and families. This has generally been true regardless of which party has controlled the state legislature or held the governorship. Do you want better public policy for children and families on issues such as who should bear the burden of our state tax system, how money in our state budget gets allocated, and on important issues like economic development, healthcare policy, K-12 education, early childhood education, and juvenile justice? Then we must improve how redistricting happens and how voting districts get drawn in Arkansas. This is why Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families supports the creation of independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, because we believe voters should choose their elected officials, not the other way around, and because we want the votes of all voters to matter. We believe that creating an independent Citizens Commission will help ensure that the redistricting process is fair and puts the interest of voters and their families rather than politicians at the forefront. This will help result in not only a more democratic process, but in better public policy that puts the interest of children and families, especially our most vulnerable children and families first. So let's take the politics out of redistricting. Let's pass this amendment once it gets on the ballot. Bonnie, do you want to take it from here and give us more of the details?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, for having us on. This is a really important discussion to have, and this is something that I'm very passionate about. As Rich was saying, we know that gerrymandering is a huge problem in the state of Arkansas. In fact, we rank number 8 for the most gerrymandered state in the country in terms of our legislative districts. And this impacts, these maps impact how our electoral maps are drawn. And so Arkansas Voters First is a grassroots, nonpartisan campaign working to make redistricting fair, open, and transparent. I serve as chair of Arkansas Voters First. I am also president of the League of Women Voters of Washington County, and I serve on the state board of directors for the League of Women Voters of Arkansas. So the League of Women Voters is very much behind this amendment, and we are a fiercely nonpartisan group, and we've been around for 100 years. And so we would not back something that we did not believe was good policy and made government better. So our amendment seeks to establish a citizen-led commission to redraw our maps. Currently, we have our maps drawn by politicians and lobbyists in the dark, basically, behind closed doors, and with no citizen input. And we know that this leads to poorly drawn maps. And politicians from both sides of the aisle draw bad maps, Democrats and Republicans. So this really is a nonpartisan issue. So currently, the maps are drawn, as Rich said, every 10 years following the census. And that is done in Arkansas through the Board of Apportionment and through the state legislature. The Board of Apportionment is made up of the governor, the Secretary of State, and the Attorney General. Those 3 individuals draw the maps for our state legislative districts. And the state legislature draws the maps for our 4 U.S. congressional districts. That is all politicians with that power. And what our amendment seeks to establish is to put that power in the hands of Arkansas voters. We want an independent commission to be the group with the vested power to do this. And so this amendment would make this commission of 9 individuals, and there are strict provisions regarding who can serve on this commission. So you cannot serve if you are a lobbyist, if you are a former elected official. We have a lot of strikes, essentially, because we want this to be a really independent group. And so you cannot have been a registered lobbyist, you can't be an immediate family member of any of these groups. And so these 9 individuals would be responsible for drawing our maps. And this would be done in an open, fair, and transparent way. So the meetings are open, the public can give input, consensus is required amongst the commission. And so the overall goal is to create competitive districts in the state of Arkansas. We don't want districts that lead to a gerrymandered state that favor one group, one political party over the other. And as Rich alluded to, we know that gerrymandering happens in a partisan fashion, but we also know that racial gerrymandering is a huge problem. And I know that gerrymandering is sort of this word, it just makes people's eyes roll back in their head. It's maybe not the most interesting thing, right, to talk about, but it's everything. It's the foundation of our democracy, and gerrymandering is really the manipulation of those district lines by politicians to favor the group that's in power, so to protect incumbency. And as I was saying, that does not lead to competitive districts. We want competitive districts. When we don't have competitive districts, politicians are not held accountable to the voters. They pick their voters instead of voters electing their officials. And so they're just unaccountable. They just pick their voters based on how people vote. And they do this in a very sophisticated way. They take all of this data and they determine how people are going to vote. And they just draw lines and they pick voters. And they do this through a process called packing and cracking. And this really dilutes the power of different groups of people, especially groups, they're termed majority minority districts. So we'll either see politicians put a majority minority group in one district to dilute the power, right? Like it's some sort of concession. We'll give this group this one district and that's all they get. And we're going to take the rest. Or we're going to break up that group. We're going to crack them and dilute their votes so they don't get a say in who their politicians are and who represents them in our government. And this is an awful practice that undermines representative democracy. And we have seen independent redistricting commissions established in other states, and they have been very successful. And we know that the voters of Arkansas want this. Over 65% of people polled in Arkansas support an independent redistricting commission in the state of Arkansas. And more importantly, they want to be able to vote on this issue in November. We have had a few roadblocks. I'm sure many of you are aware if you're interested in this topic and you've been following along. The state and Secretary of State especially have really fought back on this petition, despite the fact that over 150,000 Arkansas voters showed up during a global pandemic to sign for fair maps. The state and the powers that be do not want to let go of their authority to draw the maps, which just shows you how important this is. They do not want to let go of their ability to manipulate districts. And this is, again, both parties. We don't want either party to be able to do this. So they have fought back on us. We had a lawsuit early on to be able to safely collect signatures during the pandemic, and we fought to get signatures on petitions that were unnotarized and unwitnessed. We had a victory in federal court. The state was upset and appealed to a higher court, asking Arkansans to choose between their health and participating in democracy, exercising their constitutional right to petition and amend the Constitution. And so we had that battle. And then once we turned in our signatures, like I said, over 150,000, we had the Secretary of State say that due to some wording in a certification for background checks, that he just was not going to count our signatures, just stopped counting our signatures. And so we filed another lawsuit to get the Secretary of State to count our signatures and not disenfranchise 150,000 plus people who signed up and want to vote on this issue in November. And so we appealed to the Supreme Court. Our litigation is, we're still pending in the Supreme Court. We're confident that we will make it to the ballot in November. The League of Women Voters of Arkansas just did a poll, and the poll showed that over 89% of people want to be able to vote on this issue regardless of how they feel about redistricting reform. That is 89% of people polled who want to vote on this in November. And so it's really important that we get this on the ballot and that the state does not rule on this, does not disenfranchise all of these people who signed up to sign, does not disenfranchise them over this one word, over this hyper technicality. And so we are in court and we're fighting, and that's where we're at. We're continuing on. We know that this is, like I said, very important and very popular in the state. The majority of Arkansans want a fair and transparent redistricting process in this state. And so I know that we'll have time for some questions at the end. So I will be here to answer those if anybody has any questions for me.
Thanks, Bonnie. And Scott?
Muted. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. All right. Well, hey, Rich and Bonnie, thanks so much. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak a little bit on this topic. Again, my name is Scott Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director, CEO of the Urban League of the State of Arkansas. We're a 100-plus-year-old organization formed back in 1938, and our primary objective is to make sure that we highlight and find ways to protect interests of, in particular, Black folks here in the state of Arkansas. We're one of the 100 or so affiliates of the National Urban League, which is headquartered in DC, and we're proud to be one of the few statewide affiliates in the country. So this whole topic is very interesting to us. Quite frankly, a couple of weeks ago, Bonnie and Emily Kearns was on one of our video segments talking about the same topic, because it's a big deal. I mean, it is a significant deal, as Bonnie just said, that you got 150,000 Arkansans that have signed up to say this is an important matter. This is something that we want to see the state of Arkansas do. And we're seeing the pushback on a super technicality. I mean, if you really delve into this, you'd be amazed at what this argument is about, which one would really be questioned to say, how do you even make that argument? But nonetheless, that's where we are. Arkansas is surrounded by 5 states that all have Black representation at the congressional level. Arkansas has not since Reconstruction. That says something about what's going on in the state of Arkansas. That should not be. That is something that we have to consider. Why is that? And so a lot of what we're talking about here today is why we see that, why we don't see representation, that looks like the state of Arkansas. I mean, that's something that is very important. So this whole concept of gerrymandering, if you look at the congressional maps and the layouts, they make no sense unless you're doing something intentionally to make it work for a group. And that's exactly what has occurred, is identifying, folks that are most likely to vote for a certain group and creating those maps to make sure that occurs. So I think we've got to, as a state, begin to really look at how our voting is utilized. I hope everyone that's on is registered to vote. If you're not registered to vote, get out there, get registered, understanding on November 3rd, we've got some real significant issues out there. But it's incredibly important that we look at how this process is worked. By forming a citizens committee, at least we move into the right space of creating an opportunity where districting is mimicking what citizens want. And so in the ballot issue that's being put forth, that's exactly what's going on. It's trying to put back into the hands of the people the operation of our state, the operation of our country. And that's something, and we at the Urban League really get behind. We've got 4 pillars from social justice, education, economic empowerment, and job creation, health, as well as many others that we look at. But when we look at a concept like this is social justice. This is where we begin to say, okay, what are the citizens of this state able to manage, to make sure is in place so that people can feel like that what is important to them gets looked at. If you have one group, being Democrats, Republicans, whatever you want to call it doesn't matter if we're not creating processes that covers the opportunity for everyone's opinion to be addressed, that everyone has a chance to be fairly represented. And that's not what we're seeing right now with the current process. So Bonnie, I'm excited to hear what you all are doing. Rich, I'm excited to hear that your organization is behind this, because this is about people. This is about choices that people can make for themselves and have at least to be heard and considered at our legislative level. So yeah, we at the Urban League are incredibly supportive of this. We're hoping that we can get enough muster behind it so that we can get this on the ballot, so that we can have a process that starts to move towards really looking out for what people are interested in, what people are needing in this state, as opposed to a politicized structure that we're seeing today.
Thank you so much. We'll start going into questions now. And I'll start with a question from Laura that I think's probably for Bonnie, but if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box, and you can also unmute yourself and just ask the question too if you want. So Laura asked, have any of the states that have established an independent commission actually drawn districts yet? In other words, have they been around long enough to be drawn after the last census?
I'm muting myself. So there are a handful of states that have passed independent redistricting commissions. I believe 10 states have some form of an independent redistricting commission. Some of those are more advisory panels. I don't know if any of them, I mean, it's a very good question. What we've seen the pattern to be is that a lot of, once these have passed and once they're on the ballot, we know that they passed because these are very popular with people. But there's just, once they're passed, we see that there's just continual litigation that happens because the state is not happy, right? I mean, politicians do not want to give up this power because it wins them elections. And so I can't speak to what states have successfully, drawn lines, but I can say there are a handful that have them passed and are working on actually getting them established and up and running for this next round of redistricting. And we have several states who are working on getting one on the ballot in November. So they're also actively working.
Thank you. We also have a question from Vernon. When was the appeal to the Supreme Court case or to the Supreme Court filed? And is there a deadline for getting the issue on the ballot?
So we filed, 2 weeks ago now, or maybe just a little under 2 weeks with our original action in the Supreme Court. And ballots are due to the county clerks, I believe, August 20th. So we should know, and we're hoping to know before then. Again, I don't know when we will have a ruling from the Supreme Court, but that is when ballots are due. So we are hoping to know by August 19th whether or not we are on the ballot.
So very soon. And I think it's important to note this opportunity is really a once in a decade opportunity, right?
Correct. So it's really important because we only get this opportunity every 10 years. So I cannot stress the importance of this enough. We have to do it now. We cannot wait another decade to get fair maps in Arkansas. And as I said at the beginning of my portion of this, we are a top 10 state for gerrymandering. And we're just going to get worse. We know that this is a bad practice, and just because people have been doing it this way, for X amount of years, doesn't mean it should continue. We have a fix. It's a good fix, and it's popular with the people, and the people should be able to vote on it.
Any other questions? If not, I have a question for Scott. You talked a bit about how Arkansas is the only state in our area that doesn't have a representative of color to Congress. Can you talk about how we've seen gerrymandering play out, in recent history or throughout history to, suppress voters of color, and how that's a very real reality even to this day?
Yeah, absolutely, Rebecca. Again, all of the states that surround Arkansas that have different processes, if you will, for redistricting, have made a point to make sure that there's congressional representation, people of color. And unfortunately, Arkansas has not done that. And so as a result, we have not had since Reconstruction. I mean, currently not. There's a second district congressional challenge right now with Joyce Elliott running against French Hill. But if you look at the district, District 2, it is a very challenging district. It will be very challenging to see potentially a person of color to win that district. It's certainly possible. But again, I think we have to make sure that states look at, what are the policies that are out there? What is the outcome of those policies? When we see scenarios, as we do here in Arkansas, where we've never had a person of color in DC representing our state, that says something. That certainly says something to other states. It says something to the citizens of this state. It certainly should say something to the politicians in the state that should step back and question that. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that. So the result of that is certainly some of the issues that would be of high priority of folks of color are often not getting the level of addressing and to get a level of concern, interest, support, what have you, at the level that needs to be. And as a result of that, we see certain things in our state that are just not good policy, that are policies that a lot of times that would disproportionately have ill effects on certain groups of people. And unfortunately, without having representation that's sensitive in that area, that recognizes those challenges, it's very difficult to see change. It's very difficult to see those issues get leveled up to the top to get the type of concern, interest, and addressing that's necessary. So that is the downside. And trust me, that affects all people in the state of Arkansas, not just one group.
I will also add to that. Thank you, Scott. That was a great explanation. We know that racial gerrymandering is very real and destructive. And the whole point is to, with this amendment, is to protect representative democracy.
Yes.
And our current system undermines representative democracy. It does not protect it. So we do not have equal representation in our government. Our government does not reflect the political diversity, the diversity of our state. It just does not reflect that. And so we need a better policy. And we have 3 people who are in charge of drawing our state legislative districts, 3. And there's no accountability. They can do this behind closed doors with lobbyists, and there's just no accountability. We have a state Senate district in Arkansas that has 333 people in Alpena and it's drawn up into 3 different districts. That is insane. I mean, that's just not okay. No.
Yeah.
And Rebecca, if folks think that practice doesn't go on, I would just point folks to what happened in North Carolina a couple of years ago, where the party in power brought in a Republican, a political consultant for the sole purpose of drawing the voting maps in such a way that would favor Republican candidates. In that case, it was a very partisan issue. And after the consultant died, his daughter was going through all of his effects, including his emails, and found a treasure trove of emails of him communicating with politicians and lobbyists about the best way to draw districts with the sole purpose of disenfranchising voters of color. It was there in writing in his own words. And so that practice does go on, and it's very, very real, and it's bad for all of us. So,
yeah, I appreciate that, Richard, because again, we cannot be blind to think that this does not occur. We live in a society where there's some folks out there that just aren't folks you want to have over for dinner, and this goes on. And I think that as citizens, we have to make sure we take steps to really make sure that all folks have an opportunity to be represented. That's what this country was built on. And that's where we'll get back. And so this is why this is incredibly important. Bonnie, my hat goes off to you. Ruth Bell is one of my favorite people. She comes to all of our planning commission meetings. And the work that you all do at the League of Women Voters is phenomenal. But again, people have got to get out. They've got to vote. You got to vote for everything. You got to vote down ballot. Understand what's going on. That's the purpose of these Zoom calls and presentations. Learn about this. Do the research that you can. But again, this is the type of information that's important that you need to share with your neighbors. People need to understand what's going on, why it's important to be active, be vocal about things like this. Because trust me, there are 3 people that make this decision currently. But those 3 people, if they hear what's really desirous of our society, they do listen. And that begins to effectuate change. That does give the opportunity where we can continue to push issues like this and get the type of attention where we can get it on the ballot.
And redistricting it's the new frontier in the fight for civil rights. We don't want voters to be suppressed. We want people to be represented in our democracy, in our government. That's what we want. It's very simple. It's a very simple fix. And I know that this is a question for Rich. I'm just hopping on this about what can people do to help support this. Go to arvotersfirst.org. Write our Secretary of State, John Thurston, and tell him to count our signatures and certify us and put us on the ballot. You can follow the League of Women Voters of Arkansas on Facebook, any of your local leagues, and get involved that way. Write, call. Tell the Secretary of State, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, that we want this and that we want the opportunity to vote on it. Like I said, despite how people feel about the issue about redistricting reform, 89% of people want to vote on this in November. And they should have the opportunity. We followed the law. Our canvassers passed background checks. We followed the law during a global pandemic. We more than met the signature requirement. And now it's just hyper technicalities that the state is just trying to push us off the ballot because they know if we're on, the people will vote for this. So sorry, Rich, you can also chime in with advocates.
No, I was actually going to ask you that question. So you, good.
I have a question. This is Missy Kincaid, and I joined the Arkansas Advocates team in Northwest Arkansas about a year and a half ago. I was just on your website, Bonnie. Is there an actual map of Arkansas that I could find that might kind of tell the story visually?
Mm-hmm. So we do have maps. If you follow us on social media, we do have some different graphics. Also, we're working on putting out a map. There is one. If you go to the Secretary of State's website, you can see the House districts, the Senate districts, the congressional districts. And I actually have, I'm not using it today, but I have a PowerPoint that I love that I made just in my living room. And I took the congressional districts over the past 6 or 7 decades and just, it's striking when you see how they have changed shape, over time. It's because to your point, Missy, visuals are very powerful. And so, we're really working on helping people to see the visual and to see what these districts look like because they are so oddly shaped. Those are very powerful images. So so it's a great point that the maps are very important in helping people to understand and grasp the importance of this issue. And so we're pushing that out through our outlets and our website. So stay tuned for more maps. I am a map nerd, but you can also find them through the Secretary of State's website. But like I said, we'll be sharing those too.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Laura, do you want to say your comment? And I'll also tell everyone, Laura put in the chat box a link to the current congressional map.
Yeah, and if you're watching this recording later, if you just Google Arkansas congressional map, for the current map, it's just a stark example of crazy drawing of boundaries to try to manipulate political outcomes that fails, by the way, but that it should never be that way. So my comment was just that I was talking to a former state senator the other day about redistricting, and he talked about how a former governor drew him out of his own district because he disagreed with the governor on an issue. And this is like something that people hasn't even batted an eye about for decades. And time immemorial. So it shouldn't be that way, but, disagreeing with the governor who then his retribution, his revenge is to not allow you to be elected in your district again. So nobody should have that power. And it should be, that's why we need an independent redistricting commission. And it doesn't matter which party is in power. As Rich said, it's not been done right yet. So that's why we need an independent commission.
I would also say that if you're interested in this topic, and thank you, Laura, because that's a great, perfect example. There's a documentary that was recently released. It's called Slay the Dragon. And it follows the case in the Supreme Court that when SCOTUS really kicked this back to the states and put the onus on states to handle partisan redistricting. And it also follows the campaign in Michigan. But really, this documentary gives you some great insight into the very sophisticated operation behind gerrymandering and how much money and how many resources go into manipulating maps across the country to protect these gerrymandered districts. It gives you a great bird's eye view of the problem overall in the country, how different states are working to combat it through these independent redistricting commissions, and just how powerful those forces are that are working very hard to keep politicians and lobbyists in control of that process.
Any other questions? It sounds like we'll have an answer soon, one way or another, about the court case. And like you said, the court case has reached philosophical levels. But what are the different scenarios if the court rules one way or the other? What's the future hold?
We're right now we're focused. We're just laser focused on making it, to November. That's our goal, and we're confident that we're going to get there. There is no waiting. We can't wait. We cannot put this off. So for us, we're not making a plan B, because Arkansans want this. They want this. They signed for this. We followed the law. This is a very popular proposal in the state, and we're going to get on the ballot. We're confident. Like I said, we can't wait another decade. So we are fighting, and I invite everybody else to join us. Go to arvotersfirst.org, sign up for our newsletter, donate if you can. If you can't donate financially, just donate your time. Like I said, write to your elected officials and tell them that you support this and you want this. Write to the Secretary of State, write to our state leaders, and get other people to write, and follow us on social media. Join your local league, follow your local league on social media, follow the League of Women Voters of Arkansas on social media. Just being engaged helps a ton. Sharing our content helps more than you know, and keeping us visible and making sure that politicians know that voters want this is extremely important.
And we actually did get one more question. Anne asked, can you explain the process of how districts are presently laid out and how the representatives are chosen to represent these districts? What's the process right now?
So that's the process. So the districts are created through that process every 10 years through the Board of Apportionment and through the state legislature. They are the ones who draw the maps, and they do so in a partisan fashion to protect those people in power already, to protect their party. And we see both parties do this. We see politicians from both sides of the aisle engaging in bad map drawing. And so that's how the districts are created, is through that process every 10 years, through the Board of Apportionment, the governor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and then the state legislature, who is responsible for drawing the 4 U.S. congressional map. And even within the state legislature, these are subcommittees, right? So even, not a lot of people still involved in that process.
You're on mute, Rebecca.
I'm so bad at technology. I'm a millennial. I'm supposed to be good at it. But Carol said, if the referred amendment passes, that makes it more difficult to get an initiated act on the ballot. We will never have the chance to change this again.
That's a great point, Carol. And Carol actually serves in the, she's on the state board for the League of Women Voters of Arkansas, and she is on the board for Arkansas Voters First. So she is a really strong supporter of this amendment, and is very knowledgeable and has put in a lot of work for this as well. And what she's referring to is the fact that the state legislature is trying to make the ballot initiative process more difficult going forward. Arkansas is one of 15 states that has a ballot initiative process allowing citizens to propose legislation and vote on it. And so we're fortunate to have this process, but it's constantly under attack. As we've seen this the past 6 months or so with the state, constantly fighting back against us. And then also trying to make it more difficult in the future by creating even more barriers to get on the ballot. And so for many reasons, like I said earlier, this has to happen now. It just has to happen this year. We cannot go another decade.
And Laura pointed out that that is issue 3 that will be on the ballot.
Yeah, and Arkansas Advocates will likely be having a future Zoom call or conference on issue 3, and so stay tuned, because that's another big issue on its own right that's worthy of its own hour at some point in the near future.
Yeah, you'll also hear from the Urban League in that same space as well.
The League of Women Voters.
All of the leagues.
All of the leagues.
Bonnie, question for you. I know we're waiting on a court ruling that's going to greatly influence how this process plays out. I know a lot of folks kind of think out there, well, the Supreme Court is not a political body. They're supposed to make decisions based on legal precedents. But I would just point out that the Supreme Court is a political body, and they very much read media accounts and in the newspapers, and they very much follow what citizens are doing, and what citizens are calling out in terms of issues. So so I would just encourage folks, that over the next week or two, while we wait for that court ruling, we need to be as loud and as visible as possible. Because while we have to try and get the Secretary of State to do the right thing, at the same time, there's this, there will be a court decision coming down, and the louder that we can, talk about how bad this is, that, if you think that the Supreme Court justices are immune to what the public is saying around issues, you're crazy. And so for that court reason, for that court case as well, we need to be loud and visible over the next couple of weeks.
That's so important, Rich. Thank you for saying that. Like I said, the League of Women Voters of Arkansas put out a poll, and we know that polls are very important to show and prove that we have public support, and we do. And this poll we released, you can see the press release through our Facebook page, and it's currently up through the League of Women Voters of Washington County's website. So if you Google League of Women Voters of Washington County, you can find the press release for that poll, as well as a PDF with the crosstabs with that poll attached. And so really what we want to share is just that, like I said, 89% of Arkansans want to vote on this issue regardless of how they feel about redistricting reform. And so that's really the message that we need to be sharing right now over and over and over again, that we want the opportunity to vote on this. We don't want to be disenfranchised, and that we want fair maps in this state, and that the system right now that we have in place does not benefit the constituents of this state.
Thank you, Bonnie. Any final thoughts from Rich or Scott before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think Rich said it. We say it all the time at the Urban League. It's not enough to vote. You've got to act. You've got to lead. At this point, everybody, we expect you to vote. We need you to act. We need to make sure that everyone that you know knows about this issue, that they're vocal. As we said, reach out to the Secretary of State's office and just let the Secretary of State's office know that this is an important issue. As you're talking to folks about anything, bring this up. Again, the more those that are in place to make a decision, whether or not this gets on the ballot, if they're hearing consistently that this is an important Arkansas issue, then it will move in the direction that is important to Arkansas. So this is the time to act.
The other important action that you can take is to write a letter to the editor. Write to your newspaper. It does not have to be anything sophisticated. It doesn't have to be, just voice your support for this. A letter to the editor is so powerful. So if you support this, please write on behalf of this petition, on behalf of this amendment. That would really that would be so amazing and so helpful, and I would really appreciate it. And like we've all said, just share, be vocal about it. Like Scott said, we know that voting is one way to take action, but it's not everything. We need to be active and engaged and moving on this issue right now.
That's right. Post it on your social media page.
Yes. Please.
Rich?
Ditto to what Scott and Bonnie both just eloquently said. So,
Well, thank you everyone so much for attending this evening. We really appreciate it. I'll send a follow-up email with more information, and I'll also upload this recording to Facebook. We have several more events coming up over the next few weeks on different topics regarding health and other issues impacting kids, and make sure you sign up for those, especially since I may or may not be able to get it on Facebook Live. So sign up on Zoom to guarantee your spot. But thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thanks, y'all.
Scott, thank you all for attending. And
Thank you.